Welcome to Shul.com. We are learning from Otzar, Pelaot, Hatorah, Parashat, Vayigash, all interesting, beautiful Hidushim from Rav Zickerman. So let's take a look. Vaydaberu elav et kol divrei Yosef asher diber alehem vayar et ha'agalot asher shalach Yosef laset oto vatechi ruach Yaakov avihem. So they ended up getting back to the land, and they tell their father everything that Yosef told them, and they show him, by the way, your son Yosef, he sent you a bunch of wagons. He went outside to see the wagons. He was so happy. Suddenly, Ruach HaKodesh returns to Yaakov Avinu after 22 years of being without it. You could imagine the simcha he had. So it says in Yehuda, Saraf Agadot Sheshalach Paro. Interesting. It says that Yehuda burned the wagons that Paro sent. Yosef sent wagons and Paro sent. Let's take a look. Milashon HaPasuk, Mashma Shera'a Yaakov Rak et ha'agalot sheshalach Yosef. It seems from the pasuk that it says Vayar et ha'agalot asher shalach Yosef laset oto. But what about the agalot that the pasuk told us that Paro sent? Where were those? Vehiksha al ze b'midrash. The midrash in Yalkut Shimoni said agalot sheshalach Paro hechan hayu. Where were the wagons that Paro sent? Mitiresh midrash. What happened when Paro sent the wagons? What did he do? He engraved on them the avodah zarah Paro, and then he sent them. He put the Hermes. He put the Hermes horse and the carriage on it, or some form of avodah zarah. Alken Amad Yehuda v'saraf et kol hagalot sheshalach Paro. Yehuda said, I don't need these wagons. Let's get out of the city. They got out of the area, and they burnt them all down, and they only took the ones of Yosef. Kiragil haya shevet Yehuda lisrof avodat edilim. The tribe of Yehuda, their specialty was burning down idols and idol worshipping towns. That was their thing. Anytime they had a problem, send Yehuda. He knows that he was the arson for that matter. Like it says, how does he know that? It says in Shemuel Bet 5-21, Vayazvut Sham et Atzabehem Vayisaim David Va'anashav. And in Masechet Rosh Hashanah on page 22, Amud Bet Deshu Vayisaim Shehu Milashon Vayisrefim. So it says Vayisaim. It means they would raise Vayisaim David. Raised what? So the Gemara tells us no, Vayisrafim. That they raised the avodah zaras, that they actually no, that they burnt them. That's what they did. Okay. Vayomer Israel Rav od Yosef beni Chai. That's 35-28. So Israel, Yaakov Avinu says, my son is still alive. Amar Yaakov le'Esav. Yaakov tells Esav, Al tismach sharei od Yosef beni Chai. Yaakov sends a message to Esav. Don't get too happy. My son Yosef is alive. Interesting. Besefet beorei hamaharai lebaal terumat hadeshen zal katav biur nifla. So he says an interesting biur explanation.
Why did he say that?
Let's see right now. Lebaer ma she'amar Yaakov Avinu alav shalom. Rav od Yosef beni Chai. Why did he say the word Rav od Yosef beni Chai? He could have just said Vayomer Israel od Yosef beni Chai. That when he said the word Rav, he was talking about Esav. Esav is called Rav. How do I know he's called Rav? Not he's called your rabbi. He was called Rav. Why? Because it says Rav Ya'bod Sa'ir. The Rav, the older one, is going to worship or work for the younger one. Kidechtiv, like it says in 25-23, Verav Ya'bod Sa'ir. That when Yosef went missing, and everyone thought that he was killed by a wild animal. Why? Because they dipped his ketonet pasim inside of goat blood, and goat blood looks the most similar to human blood. Samach Esav simha gedola ad meod. When he heard that Yosef got killed, he was thrilled. Because he knew that Yosef was the antithesis of the power of Esav Arasha. Like it says in Ovadiyah 1-18, Vaya bet Yaakov esh, o bet Yosef la'ava, o bet Esav lekash. It says the house of Yaakov will be a fire. When it comes to the house of Joseph, it will be a flame. And when it comes to the house of Esav, it will be straw. So Yaakov, fire, Yosef, flame, and Esav, straw. Ve'esh belo lehava, and a fire without a flame, ena sholetet lemenchak. A fire without a flame doesn't grow. So why is it mentioned that Yaakov is the flame? Because Yaakov is the flame that's going to burn down all of what Esav has, and through Yosef HaSadik. Lachen kasher shama Yaakov she'od Yosef beno kayam, when he heard Yaakov that his son was alive, and that not only is alive, he's not a janitor working in a supermarket. He's the viceroy of Egypt. Amar Yaakov Rav od Yosef beni chai kilomar Esav al tismach, says, oh, by the way, Rav, you od Yosef chai, he's still alive, and by the way, he's Moshehu bechol Eretz Mitzrayim, and he's also the leader of all of Israel. So it's interesting. And there still is the flame and the fire. Interesting. Bnei banim kebanim. Your children's children are like your children. Your grandchildren like your children. Ha'im gam bnei nechadim kebanim. Are the children of your grandchildren like your children? This, before we continue, there is a mahaloket. When does a person complete the mitzvah peru urvu of having children? So some say when you have two boys, Bet Shammai. Some say the halacha is no, Bet Hillel, one boy, one girl. Another opinion says you actually have to have one boy, one girl, and they each have to have one boy and one girl. It's got to go to the third generation. So this is an interesting point. Bishut Mabit, it says Nish'al mi kahal kadosh Damesek hasfaradit, in the Damascus Sephardi community. Hashem machru b'shnat hey alef shin gimel lebnei meshcha achat miyucheset makom bebet hachayim shelahem sheyuchlu likbor sham hem uvnehem uvnei bnehem. So there was a family, important family. They took a place in the Bet HaHayim, which is the cemetery, Bet HaAlmin, that they wanted to bury their children, their children and grandchildren. They bought plots in order to bury for Hayim Arukim. V'nosach hashtarhu, and this is how they wrote the document. Natanenu koach ureshut v'chulev ubnei banav haniskarim she'im has v'shalom yiftar shum echad mehem ba'arichut yamim she'igbar bebet ha'chaim shel hasfaradim v'shum echad me'echad lo yimche b'yadam. So they wrote a document that if any of them die from this family, them, the children and grandchildren, they can be buried in this place. V'chatumim bo chaver shel ir v'shiv'at tuve'ir. So the friend of the city, the 7 important people, probably the mayor of the city, signed it. V'achar 20 shana b'shnat shin kaf gimel, in the 20 years later, rotzim kal kadosh vadim limnoa al nashem shulchan nisket shelo yikbru od sham. They wanted, after 20 years, they didn't want the family to bury in that Bet HaAlmin, in that cemetery. It said on the document that only 3 generations can be buried there, not indefinitely. Because listen, they bought a piece of land. They said this is for the family plot. People do that today in Israel. They buy this for family plot. Today they actually sell 1 plot per person. Back then, they just bought the land. Okay, we'll take this whole corner. Whatever. It is what it is. Everyone should have a long life. Amen. And so, after 3 generations, they told them, okay, it's done. It was the grandparents, the children, and the grandson. That's not forever. And the document stated 3 generations. The 4th generation has nothing to do with this. They're not going to be here. This happened in Damascus. Upasaka mabit letovat hamishpacha shechlim likbor gam dor revi'i. The Mabit said, no, I don't agree with the way you're changed up. I understand your document says 3, but when it says 1, 2, and 3 generations, it's continuing on and on.
What's the Mabit?
The Mabit was one of the rabbis there, Rabbi Teherani. And even more than the 4th generation. That Yaakov went down to Egypt, banav ubnei banav. Him and his children, right? And if you look at the remaining pasukim, it says that when Yaakov went down to Egypt, who ubanav? Him, banav ubnei banav. Okay, children and grandchildren. And if you look there, it brings down also Peret Hesron Hamud. Shehem Dor Revi'i Yaakov. And those were not the third generation. It said Yaakov, Banav, Ubnei Banav, 3. But if you look in the count of the Pesukim, you actually see 4 generations that went down. And those were also inclusive in the 3. So when the person says you, your children, grandchildren, he means it for your forever. And he says here, the children of your grandchildren, they're also like your children. They have that same status as children. I'll read you a note on the bottom once we finish this. He wrote down in the Chidushim of the Rashba in Masechet Kiddushin Daf Dalet Amud Aleph v'zeh lashano v'had de'ka'amad b'nei banim harehem kebanim lo b'nei banim harehem kebanim davka ka'amad ela zar'o harehu kebanim v'chen mashma Sanhedrin Daf Samech Dalet Amud Bet Tanya Ma'avid beno ubito ba'esh en li ela beno ubito Ben bito minayin tamud amar ki mizar'o ilmale zar'o mashma kol yotzei yerecho. So what it says that there's an isud that if a person put his son or daughter into the fire, it was there's a form of avodah zarah, the molech, where they would sacrifice firstborns, boys, girls, all different types of worship of Satan and things like that. And over there it talks about a person and his children. So they asked the question, what about his grandchildren if he did it? Would that be in case? It said yes. Mizar'o, from all of his descendants' seed, is inclusive in that. Omnam, Beshut Shevut Yaakov, he brings down, and Cholek al Divrei Mabit b'dochei de'yotav. He argues on the Mabit, and he says, no, it's not that, doesn't go on forever. V'katav sheyesh kamarayot mehamikra lehefech, that you actually have from the Torah many proofs that when it says 3 generations, it means the 3. It doesn't mean forever. When it says children and children's children, it's only 3, not more than that. Gam ben beno bichlal bnei banav mikol makom betzava'a ubeshitarot וכדומה הולכים אחד לשון בני אדם ואין בכלל אלא מה שבפרט בן בנו ותו לא עיין שם. He argued and said, if the document says him, children and grandchildren, it's only the 3, not according to the Mabit, but we followed the Mabit on this matter, especially that he wrote the letter to a Damascus Syrian congregation. Let's take a look at the notes he has over here. Hosifa Mabit al Riyato. The Mabit added on his proof. ולא תאמר דדור רביעי נכלל במה שכתוב בכל זרעו, שהרי כתוב בכל זרעו בית פעמים ונוכל לדורשם כך. יעקב בכל זרעו איתו זכרים צדיקים כיוצא בו, ומין זרע הזכרים ולא נותר, מהם איש מן זרעו שלא בא. וכן ובנותיו ובנות בניו בכל זרעו. זרעו נקבות דום יד לבנותיו ובנות בניו, דכל זרע שהיה לו מן הבנות הביא איתו מצרימה. That he brought down also all the daughters. And if you look in the count of the 70, it doesn't include all the daughters. It does include a few important ones. It includes Yocheved, not in the count, but it does have Yocheved. She was born at the gate. And also Serach Bat Asher. But there were more. What do you mean? Every single one of the tribes were married. Their children were married. They had grandchildren, great-grandchildren. When it says only 70 went down, אפשר שבא שם מזרעו זכרים או נקבות ואותם שבאו מצרים הם 70. לכן כתב כל זרעו וכל זרעו בית פעמים כמו שכתבתי. And he says to, that's why it mentions כל זרעו and the other children. But there was more than 70 that went down for sure. There's no question about that because they all had, they were all married. Okay, let's do one more part over here. It says Ubnei Levi Gershon Kehat Merari. It says the children of Levi, who were their names, Gershon, Kehat, and Merari. That's in Pasuk 46-11. Tinok shemet kodem milah korim lo b'shem Gershon. If a baby, lo aleinu, dies before they give him a brit milah, what's the name that you call him? Gershon. Let's take a look what he says. Bebet Yosef brought down in Yoreh De'ah Siman Resh Samech Gimel. That's 263 in Yoreh De'ah. Havish b'shem Rabbeinu HaGershuni Zal, שתינוק שמת קודם המילה מלין אותו על קברו וקוראים לו שם וכן פסק בשולחן ערוך. So he says if a baby lo aleinu dies before the Brit Milah, they do a Brit Milah for the child before they bury the child, and they give the child a name. That's brought down in the Shulchan Aruch. Bekatav al zeh besefer Otzar Yad Achayim, and it's written in the book there, in Ot Tav Tav Chaf, Sheshama HaKabarnim Shemekubal Be'adam Ish Mipi Ish HaMohalim Korim Et HaTinok B'Shem Gershon. So he heard from person to person that the Mohalim, they called that baby Gershon. That's the name they gave the baby. Behosif Hatam. What's the reason? Shemekevan Sherabbenu HaGershuni Katav Hadin Shetinok Shemet Kodem HaMilak Malin Oto Al Kibro Korim Lo Shem Al Ken Korim Oto Gershon Al Shemo Sherabbenu HaGershuni. Who was the one who taught us this law that they're supposed to circumcise a baby after it passes away, Lo Alenu, before, if it didn't have a name or Brit Milah? Who told us this law? Rav Gershuni. So because of it, the inside teaching was always that if that happens, they called the baby Gershon, all of them.
Where did he bring it down from? Gershon.
Let's take a look. He has a note here on the bottom. Let's see if he talks about it. Chibaro Hagaon Rabbi Sachar Dov. That was the Otzar Yad HaChaim. That the author is Hagaon Rabbi Sachar Dov. He was the Abed Din of Buska, Bavad, he says here, in Buska, Abed Din Buska. Nulad Bishnat Tav Resh Hey, which is 605. The Aviv, Rabbi Abraham Babad, Abed Din Desham, Haya Megidulei Chasidei Belz. He was from the big rabbis of Belz. Bezachar dehistofef betzel arba'a admorim de bet Belz. He was around 4 different admorim in Belz. Mehasar Shalom ועד המערכה, זכותו יגן עלינו. ספרו נדפס לראשונה בלבוב in שנת תר"ש ס"ד, נפטר ביום זין שבט תר"ש ס"ח. Does he have any other piece on this? He doesn't. So he doesn't tell us where Rav Gershuni found this from, but I'm sure if we looked it up we can find it's an interesting point on it. There's one more nice piece of here. So before that, before Yaakov Avinu fully takes everybody down, he ended up sending Yehuda to go down there and to set up shop, set up the Beit Midrash, set up the schools, buy the houses, the real estate, set everything up so when everyone comes down, it's all ready. Why did he send Yehuda? Why didn't he send Levi? Wasn't Levi the rabbi? Wouldn't it have been better to set up the yeshiva system, Levi? Why send Yehuda? Yehuda was Malchut, the royalty. I know the main thing he built was the yeshivot. So why would you not send Levi? Shamati, over here, from the Admor min Munkach Shlita, Be'et Bikur Gomlim Lekahal Kadosh, the Admor Misans, Me'eretz HaKodesh, Bebet Yididi Harabani Nagid Rabbi Cheskel Lipshitz. Okay, so when the Rav, the Admor Munkach was visiting, the Admor Mitzans, he heard this. Be'ur nifla lapasuk vet Yehuda shalach lefanav el Yosef larot lefanav goshna. What do you hear? Dehine Rashi, and the word lefanav, Peresh, B'shem Midrash Agadan Tanchuma Siman Yud Aleph, lehorot lefanav, letaken lo bet Talmud shemisham tetzeh hora'ah. So he sent Yehuda to set up a bet hora'ah, not just a yeshiva, but a halachic yeshiva, a place where people can go and learn halacha lema'aseh, of what to do. V'lechaura yesh lehavin. We have to understand. Lama uchrach Yaakov l'shuach lefanav et Yehuda l'taken bet haTalmud. Why would Yehuda do that? V'alo Yosef hasadik yoshev b'Mitzrayim. What about Yosef hasadik? He was there. Why don't you just send him a letter that he could do it? He was also the viceroy in Egypt, second to the king. Why don't you let him do it? So you have a few questions. What about Yosef? And what about Levi, the rabbi? The Admor, Yehuda haya melech, that Yehuda was also a king. Why? Because Yehuda was the king of the family. Even though he was the 4th tribe, he was the king. but Yosef was not the king. He was the viceroy, second to the king. ולכן בית תלמוד בכדי להעמיד יסודות חזקים לקיום התורה ומצוות בתוכי ארץ מצרים אדוות הארץ היה צריך לזה מלכות ולא היה מספיק כוחו של משנה המלך. And so in order to set up a house of the Talmud, to learn Torah, to have good foundations, you need to have from it someone who is from royalty, from Malchut, not someone who is second to the king. Interesting. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.